Welcome back to Drugs and Behavior with Dr. Goodin. Today we'll be talking about Chapter 8, Alcohol, Social Beverage, Social Drug. Alright, perhaps one of the biggest problems in American society regarding drugs is a failure to acknowledge that alcohol is a psychoactive drug. How much of the damage caused by alcohol can be attributed to its social acceptance? Creating ethyl alcohol through a process known as fermentation is easy and has been done in every culture in the world. It requires only an organic material with sugar content: honey, grapes, berries, molasses, apples, corn, sugar cane, rice, pumpkins. When left undisturbed in a warm container over time, nature causes fermentation of beer by yeast cells landing on the material, consuming the sugar, and creating alcohol. Fermenting starchy grains such as barley to produce beer is called brewing and is somewhat more complicated. Barley soaked in water until it sprouts produces an enzyme that is capable of breaking down the starch into sugar. It is then slowly dried, the sprouts are removed, and the remainder, now called the barley malt, is crushed into powder and combined with water, corn, and rice to form a mixture called a mash. Adding yeast to the mash starts the fermentation process. The dried blossoms of the hop plant, called hops, are then added to the brew for the characteristic pungent flavoring and aroma. Both of these types of fermentation yield an approximate 15% alcohol content. To obtain a higher alcohol content, distillation must occur. It involves heating a container of some fermented mixture until it boils. Alcohol has a lower boiling temperature than water, so that it is reduced to a higher alcohol to water ratio in the original mixture. The alcohol-laden vapor is drawn off into a special coil apparatus known as a still, cooled until it condenses back to a liquid, and poured drop by drop into a second container where it is referred to as distilled spirits or simply liquor. It often has an alcohol content of 40 to 50%. Alcohol concentration is normally referred to in terms of proof, which is twice the alcohol percentage content. The three basic forms of alcohol beverages are wine, beer, and distilled spirits. Fermenting honey, called mead, was perhaps the first alcoholic beverage at 8000 BC. Later came wine, and then brandy, which was popular in Europe. Later the Dutch would perfect gin, which became popular throughout Europe due to it being cheap, cheaper than brandy, and faster acting than wine. It began to have an effect on society, evidenced by an increase in infant mortality of 4 times in the city compared to the countryside. Roman whiskey was also introduced. Alcohol has always been a part of life in America, where taverns served as places to get alcohol, and the centers for local business dealings, in town politics, mail delivery, overnight stay, elections, and even church. In 1813, people drank 3 times as much as now, averaging 5 drinks per day. They often took whiskey breaks at 11 a.m. and 4 p.m. every day except Sunday. Society began to consider the adverse effects of alcohol consumption and formulate some kind of social reform to mitigate issues. Liquor was the primary target. Note that it was called the temperance movement, which basically meant moderation. Drunkenness was seen to lead to poverty, a disorderly society, and civil disobedience. The phrase demon rum was meant literally, insinuating that liquor was actually a source of evil. 12 U.S. states outlawed the sale of alcoholic drink. When overall consumption of alcohol fell drastically to today's levels, the temperance movement began to gain momentum towards prohibition. The advent of the Women's Christian Temperance Union was fixated on a highly visible picture of masculine American life at that time: the saloon. In 1917, Congress passed a resolution prohibiting the manufacture, sale, transportation, or importation of intoxicating liquors, which became an amendment an amendment to the U.S. Constitution with the Volstead Act of 1919 and prohibition. Society pushed back with illegal stills by moonshiners in the countryside and the appearance of speakeasies with alcohol smuggled into the country. At first, alcohol-related deaths, cirrhosis of the liver, mental disorders, and alcohol-related crime declined. But when an underground system was established, the problems returned worse than before. Roosevelt repealed the Volstead Act and left it to the states to determine what to do with alcohol. Mississippi was the last state to repeal prohibition. Many states, including Alabama, still have wet and dry counties. The federal government taxed alcohol, which helped the economy during the Depression. This is an early example of a sin tax. To some degree, taxes are used to keep alcohol consumption at bay. Americans spend more than $140 billion on the purchase of alcoholic beverages each year, and the alcohol industry spends $1.7 million in advertisements. Let's compare alcohol types. A half ounce of alcohol can be found in a 5-ounce glass of wine, a 12-ounce bottle or can of beer, a 12-ounce bottle of wine cooler, or one shot of 80 proof liquor. Americans average 1.5 half ounces per day, with a half ounce being considered a standard drink. Note that those who drink more alter the average for those who drink less or none. Problematic alcohol consumption among college students is an issue. The establishment of 21 as a mandated legal drinking age in the U.S. delayed the occurrence of peak consumption levels to the junior or senior year. Binge drinking is defined for men as 5 or more alcoholic drinks and for women as 4 or more. Binge drinking rises sharply from age 18 to 28%. While the average for all adults is 17%. 44% of college students report having engaged in binge drinking during the 2 weeks prior. 41% of women and 49% of men. College students who drink alcohol at some time over the past year frequently report alcohol-related problems while at college, such as academic performance, missing class, falling behind, or doing poorly. 1 in 5 students report that while intoxicated they engaged in unplanned sexual activity or engaged in unprotected sex. 1 in 3 students reported doing something they regretted. Secondhand effects of alcohol refer to the adverse effects on non-drinkers, such as getting hit by a drunk driver. Among college students, 29% reported being insulted or humiliated by someone who had been drinking. 1 in 5 students reported having experienced an unwanted sexual advance. 700 college students between ages 18 and 24 die each year due to alcohol-related unintentional injuries, usually motor vehicle accidents. Among young people between ages 12 and 20, the average age to begin drinking was 14 years old. 33% of 8th graders reported they had consumed alcohol, and 15% reported they had been drunk sometime in their life. Consider the cultural aspects of drinking. For instance, wine with a meal. Alcohol is moderately soluble in fat. The pharmacology of alcohol is moderately soluble. It is moderately soluble in fat and highly soluble in water, making it easily absorbed through the gastrointestinal tract once it is ingested. It irritates the stomach lining. If the stomach is empty, in small amounts, it may help effect or buzz but will be felt very quickly, but the buzz will be delayed if there is food in the stomach. The proof of alcohol has the most to do with how quickly it will be felt. It is absorbed 20% in the stomach and 80% in the small intestine. The breakdown and elimination of alcohol is next. About 5% of alcohol is eliminated by the lungs through exhalation and results in alcoholic breath. or alcohol breath, among heavy drinkers. This allows breathalyzers to work. The remaining 95% is eliminated in the urine after the alcohol has been biotransformed into carbon dioxide and water. Alcohol solubility facilitates this passage across the blood-brain barrier. About 90% of the alcohol in the blood reaches the brain immediately. Alcohol also passes the blood-placenta barrier just as easily, affecting the fetus during development and leading to fetal alcohol syndrome, which involves mental and physical retardation. Alcohol has no biological purpose. It contains calories, but no vitamins, minerals, or any nutritional value. Therefore, the body immediately begins to break it down for removal through a process called oxidation. Oxidation occurs at the same rate no matter how much alcohol has been had. The average alcohol oxidation rate for adults is 1/3 to a half ounce of pure alcohol per hour. The blood alcohol concentration, or the BAC, is the number of grams of alcohol in the blood relative to 100 milliliters of blood expressed as a percentage. It is determined by how much is ingested, how long ago it was ingested, the body size, and the relative proportions of body fat. Alcohol is a depressant drug, so it slows down the central nervous system, although it may be excitatory at first because of its disinhibition effect, which may be viewed as stimulation. The depressive action of alcohol extends downward to lower regions of the brain as BAC levels increase, to the medulla respiratory centers, possibly leading to satiation. Alcohol has a unique ability to set up a pattern of physiological and psychological dependence due to its effect on dopamine release. 10 drinks in 1 hour puts a person in danger of death, with the lethal dose 50 and the effective dose 50 ratio being 6. Our body protects itself against alcohol by the nausea-induced and vomiting and passing out, although passing out has its own concerns. Heat loss is a big issue. Alcohol is a peripheral vasodilator, which means that blood vessels near the skin surface enlarge, leading to a greater amount of blood supply, creating a warm feeling, while actually causing your core body temperature to decrease. Dehydration is a serious risk by drinking alcohol due to the diuretic effects. Sleep has helped, but alcohol reduces the duration of rapid eye movement, or REM sleep. Alcohol in moderation increases the risk of retardation in the development of a fetus, called fetal alcohol syndrome. 9% of pregnant women consume alcohol. Alcohol interacts with other drugs to produce dangerous effects. Hangover is the headache, nausea, fatigue, and thirst that may occur after 4 to 12 hours of heavy consumption. This has been experienced by 40% of men and 27% of women over the age of 18. This often is due to the type of alcohol that has been consumed and the amount of congeners, or substances in alcoholic beverages that are toxic. Most of you probably know how it feels to be intoxicated with exhilaration and excitement, talkativeness, slurred speech, and sometimes irritability, uncoordinated movement, drowsiness, sensory motor difficulties, and stupor. The blackout is an inability to remember events that occurred during the period of intoxication, even though the individual was conscious at the time. Alcohol results in many driving fatalities, approximating 32,000 per year, or 27 deaths per day. Reaction times are slower. The coordination necessary to steer a car steadily is hampered, and the ability to stay awake when fatigued is impaired. But the major way that alcohol impairs driving abilities is by reducing the drinker's awareness of peripheral events and stimuli. A reduction in the BAC level minimum to 0.08 saves 500 lives each year, while many lives are also saved by setting 21 as the minimum drinking age. The maximum level of a BAC for drivers younger than 21 is 0.02%. Educational programs seek to stymie alcohol use in public education, and lobbying groups such as Mothers Against Drunk Driving and Students Against Drunk Driving have the main goal being to keep a drunk person from behind the wheel of a car. Many people with DUIs or DWIs are required to use an ignition interlock device that checks BAC level before starting the car, as you see in the picture. The U.S. presently is one of the most lenient countries in terms of standards for driving while intoxicated. Male drivers tend to drive after drinking at 2-to-1 the ratio of women. Over 50% of most recent physical violence was preceded by alcohol use. 50 to 60% of all murders were committed when the killer had been drinking. 40% of all male sexual aggression against adult women and 60 to 70% of male domestic violence and 60% of all child molestation is associated with alcohol. The disinhibition theory holds that ingesting alcohol on a pharmacological level impairs normal cortical mechanisms responsible for inhibiting the expression of innate or suppressed aggressive inclinations. The cognitive expectations theory holds that learned beliefs or expectations about alcohol's effect can facilitate aggressive behaviors, giving credit to the act of drinking in combination with one's personal view of how a person is supposed to respond. The alcohol myopia theory holds that intoxicated individuals are limited in their capacity to process information, so that they focus only on the most salient cues in the environment. Now notice that I did not, I failed to put a bullet for the cognitive expectations theory, which should go in between disinhibition theory and alcohol myopia theory. We will not go into depth on research related to alcohol consumption and affect. Sex and sexual desire are altered due to the expectation that alcohol increases sexual desire and performance. People are vulnerable to these effects. Men who are drunk have less sexual desire and a decreased capacity to perform sexually, although men's expectations of alcohol-related prowess are the opposite. For women, subjective arousal increases, while vaginal arousal decreases. Moderate amounts of alcohol can save your life, while immoderate amounts can destroy it. Alcohol can protect people who have the greatest risk of coronary heart disease, with 8 ounces of wine per day, resulting in a 25% reduction in the risk of coronary heart disease. Some studies are confounded because wine is more typically taken or imbibed by those of higher socioeconomic status. Moderate alcohol intake reduces the risk of diabetes mellitus, reduces the risk of stroke, reduces the risk of dementia, the risk of rheumatoid arthritis by 50%. It all depends on moderation. 1 drink for women per day equals 2 drinks per day for men. Drink when you're happy, not when you're sad, and drink in moderation. Plan ahead if you plan to drink. Make sure you will not hurt anyone or need to drive. I will see you in Chapter 9.